The thunderstorm that rolled into Portland, Oregon on the night of October 13th, 2024, was eerily similar to the one that had changed the Nakamura family's life forever 23 years earlier. As lightning split the sky above their newly purchased Victorian home on Elm Street, Sarah Nakamura was in the basement, sorting through boxes left behind by the previous owners, when she heard a sound that should have been impossible. The distinctive startup chime of a PlayStation 2 console echoed through the dusty basement, followed by the haunting melody of a video game soundtrack that seemed to drift from another era entirely. "Tom!" Sarah called to her husband upstairs, her voice carrying a mixture of confusion and unease. "Did you plug in some old gaming system down here?" Tom Nakamura descended the basement stairs, flashlight in hand as the storm had knocked out power to half the neighborhood. What he found in the far corner of the basement, glowing with an ethereal blue light, defied all logical explanation. An original PlayStation 2, covered in years of dust and clearly unplugged from any power source, was somehow running. On the connected CRT television, the title screen of Silent Hill 2 flickered ominously, displaying a save game dated October 13th, 2001, exactly 23 years earlier to the day. "That's impossible," Tom whispered, approaching the setup cautiously. "There's no power down here, and look, the console isn't even plugged in." Sarah joined her husband, staring at the glowing screen in disbelief. The save file name read Danny and Marcus and showed 4 hours and 23 minutes of gameplay, frozen at a location within the game called Room 312 of the Otherworld Hotel. As if responding to their presence, the PlayStation 2's disc tray suddenly ejected with a mechanical whir, revealing the original Silent Hill 2 game disc, apparently untouched by time despite the console having been abandoned in the basement for over 2 decades. "We need to call someone," Sarah said, backing away from the inexplicable scene. "This isn't normal. Technology doesn't just work without electricity." But Tom was transfixed by something else he'd noticed. Beside the gaming setup, partially hidden under a dusty tarp, was a collection of items that looked like they'd been carefully preserved. 2 pairs of small sneakers, a backpack with Danny Chen written in fading marker, and what appeared to be a journal or notebook. "Sarah, look at this," Tom said, carefully lifting the notebook. "I think we just found something related to the previous owners. The Nakamuras had purchased the house from an estate sale, inheriting it from an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had owned it for over 20 years. The real estate agent had mentioned that the house had a complicated history, but had been vague about the details. Now, confronted with evidence of children who had obviously lived there, they were beginning to understand that complicated might have been an understatement. Tom opened the notebook, revealing pages filled with a child's handwriting and crude drawings of video game characters. The entries were dated from late 2001, and as he read, the pieces of a tragic puzzle began to emerge. October 10th, 2001. "Mom and Dad got us the new PlayStation 2. It's so cool. We've been playing Silent Hill 2, but it's really scary. Danny says I'm too young, but I'm not scared." October 11th, 2001. Weird dreams again. "I keep dreaming about being inside the game. Danny had the same dream. We told Mom, but she says it's just because we've been playing too much." October 12th, 2001. "The game is acting weird. Sometimes the characters move by themselves. Danny thinks the disc might be scratched, but it looks fine. Going to play more tomorrow after school." The final entry was dated October 13th, 2001, exactly 23 years ago. October 13th, 2001, big storm tonight. Power keeps going out, but the PlayStation stays on somehow. Danny says we should stop playing, but I want to see what's in room 312. The game keeps telling us to go there. It's like it's calling us. Tom felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. He looked at his wife, who had been reading over his shoulder, her face pale in the flickering light from the still glowing console. "Tom, we need to research this house's history," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Right now." Despite the late hour and the power outages throughout the neighborhood, Tom managed to connect to the internet using his phone's hotspot. What he found in the Portland Police Department's archived news releases made his blood run cold. The headline from the October 15, 2001 edition of the Oregonian read, "Two brothers vanished during electrical storm, police baffled by circumstances." The article detailed the mysterious disappearance of 12-year-old Danny Chen and his 10-year-old brother Marcus from their home on Elm Street. According to the report, their parents, David and Linda Chen, had returned home from a dinner date to find their house empty, except for the babysitter, who had fallen asleep on the couch and claimed she had last seen the boys playing video games in the basement around 9 p.m. The most puzzling aspect of the case was that the basement showed no signs of forced entry. The boys' shoes and jackets were still in the house, and the only unusual element was that their PlayStation 2 was still running, displaying a paused game of Silent Hill 2 at a location the police report described as Room 312 of some kind of hotel within the game. "They never found the boys," Tom said, scrolling through follow-up articles. "The case went cold after 6 months. The parents moved away in 2002, and Mrs. Patterson bought the house from the bank after it went into foreclosure." Sarah was staring at the PlayStation 2, which had remained mysteriously operational throughout their research. "Tom, what if whatever happened to those boys is still happening? What if that console turning on isn't a coincidence?" As if in response to her words, the television screen flickered and the game's audio began to play. The character on screen, a man searching through a fog-shrouded town, began moving forward without any human input, navigating through the game's dark corridors with purpose. "Nobody's touching the controller," Tom observed, his voice tight with growing fear. "The character is moving by itself." They watched in fascination and horror as the game character moved through Silent Hill 2's twisted landscape, making turns and avoiding enemies with the skill of an experienced player. The character was heading toward a specific destination, a hotel that loomed ominously in the game's perpetual fog. "It's going to room 312, Sarah whispered, "just like in the notebook." The implications of what they were witnessing began to sink in. Either they were experiencing an elaborate hoax, a technological impossibility, or something far more disturbing. The digital ghost of 2 missing children, trapped for 23 years within the electronic confines of a video game. Tom made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "We're calling the police. If those boys are still missing, if their case was never solved, then maybe this is somehow connected." Detective Maria Santos had been with the Portland Police Bureau for 15 years, but she had never received a call quite like the one that came in at 11:47 p.m. on October 13, 2024. When the dispatch operator explained that homeowners were reporting paranormal activity related to a 23-year-old missing persons case, Santos's first instinct was to refer it to the psychiatric emergency team. But something about the caller's demeanor, calm, rational, and genuinely frightened rather than attention-seeking, made her decide to respond personally. Besides, she remembered the Chen brothers' case from her early days as a patrol officer. It had been one of those cases that haunted everyone who worked on it, not because of violence or obvious foul play, but because it made absolutely no logical sense. When Detective Santos arrived at the Elm Street house 40 minutes later, she found Tom and Sarah Nakamura waiting on their front porch, both looking shaken but coherent. What they showed her in the basement challenged everything she thought she knew about the intersection of technology and reality. The PlayStation 2 was indeed running without any visible power source. The game was indeed playing itself, and the setup was indeed identical to the scene that had been documented by crime scene photographers 23 years earlier. Santos had reviewed those photos just months ago when the case had come up during a cold case review meeting. "Has anyone touched the console or the game?" Santos asked, pulling on latex gloves and approaching the setup carefully. "We haven't touched anything except the notebook," Tom replied. "The game's been playing continuously since we found it. The character has been exploring the same hotel for over an hour, but it seems to be avoiding room 312 specifically." Detective Santos observed the gameplay for several minutes, taking notes and photos. The character on screen moved with deliberate intelligence, solving puzzles and navigating obstacles in ways that suggested conscious thought rather than random program execution. "I need to contact some people," Santos said finally. "This is beyond anything in my experience, but there are specialists who might be able to explain what's happening here." What Detective Santos didn't tell the Nakamuras was that the Chen brothers' case had never truly been closed in her mind. She had personally reviewed the evidence multiple times over the years, and there were aspects of the case that had always bothered her. The original investigation had focused on conventional explanations, kidnapping, family disputes, or the boys running away, but several pieces of evidence had never fit those theories. Neighbors had reported seeing strange lights emanating from the Chen house's basement windows during the storm. The babysitter, when pressed under hypnosis, had described hearing children's voices coming from the basement even after the boys had supposedly vanished. And most puzzling of all, electronic devices throughout the house had malfunctioned in ways that defied technical explanation. The next morning, Detective Santos assembled a team that would have seemed absurd for any other case. Dr. James Morrison, a forensic technology expert. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a parapsychologist from Portland State University, and Agent Timothy Brooks from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, who specialized in unusual missing persons cases. "Before we proceed," Dr. Morrison said as the team gathered in the Nakamura's basement, "I want to establish that what we're witnessing is genuinely anomalous. I've brought equipment to measure electromagnetic fields, power consumption, and data transmission around this console." His initial readings were startling. The PlayStation 2 was somehow drawing power from an unknown source, generating electromagnetic fields that were off the charts, and most impossibly, transmitting and receiving data despite having no network connection. "This console is communicating with something," Dr. Morrison announced after an hour of testing, "but I can't determine what or where. The data patterns suggest two-way communication, as if the game is responding to input from an external source." Dr. Vasquez had been observing the gameplay with equal fascination. "The character behavior patterns are consistent with two different players," she noted. "Sometimes the movement is cautious and methodical. Other times it's impulsive and exploratory. It's as if two different personalities are taking turns controlling the game." Agent Brooks had been reviewing the original case files while the others conducted their technical analysis. "The timing can't be coincidental," he observed. "The console activates on the exact anniversary of the disappearance, during a similar weather pattern, and displays the exact same game state that was found 23 years ago. Either this is an elaborate hoax, or we're dealing with something unprecedented." As the team discussed their findings, the game character suddenly stopped moving. For several minutes, the screen remained static, showing the character standing in a hallway outside room 312. Then slowly, text began to appear on the screen. Text that wasn't part of the original game. "We've been waiting," appeared in glowing letters across the television screen. The room fell silent as everyone stared at the impossible message. Dr. Morrison checked his equipment readings, which showed a massive spike in electromagnetic activity coinciding with the text appearance. "Help us" appeared next, followed by "Room 312. The door is locked from our side." Detective Santos felt her heart racing as she realized they might be witnessing actual communication from Danny and Marcus Chen, or whatever remained of them after 23 years trapped within a video game. "Can you hear us?" she asked aloud. Feeling somewhat ridiculous but compelled to respond, the character on screen nodded, a movement that wasn't possible in the original game's programming. "Storm brought us in. Need Storm to get out," appeared on the screen. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her scientific skepticism warring with what she was observing. "If this is genuine communication, we need to understand what happened to them and how we might help them." Over the next several hours, through a painstaking process of yes-no questions and text responses, they began to piece together the Chen brothers' story. According to the communications appearing on screen, Danny and Marcus had somehow been pulled into the game during the electrical storm of October 13th, 2001. They had been trapped within the digital world of Silent Hill 2, experiencing the game's reality as their own reality. "Scary here," one message read. "Monsters are real. We hide in room 312, but door won't open from inside." The implications were staggering. If the brothers were somehow conscious within the game, they had been experiencing 23 years of psychological horror in a world designed to terrify players. "Time different here," another message explained. "Feels like forever. Please help us come home." Dr. Morrison had been documenting everything, but he was struggling to develop any scientific framework for what they were witnessing. "If we accept that human consciousness can somehow interface directly with digital systems," he said, "then theoretically there might be a way to reverse the process. But we'd need to understand exactly how they entered the system in the first place." Agent Brooks had been thinking about the logistics of the original disappearance. The storm, the electrical activity, the console staying powered despite outages. What if the boys were somehow electrocuted while playing, and instead of dying, their consciousness was transferred into the game's digital environment? It sounded like science fiction, but given what they were observing, conventional explanations had already proven inadequate. As the day progressed, the team worked to establish more detailed communication with the boys. They learned that Danny and Marcus had maintained their individual personalities and memories, that they had been trying to find a way out of the game for 23 years, and that they somehow knew when conditions were right for potential escape. "Another storm tonight" appeared on the screen as evening approached. "Same as when we came in. Maybe can get out, but need help." Detective Santos realized they were facing a decision that no police manual had ever prepared her for. If there was any possibility that two missing children could be rescued from their digital prison, didn't they have to try? But attempting to help the boys escape raised its own terrifying questions. What would happen to bodies that had been missing for 23 years? What would 23 years of psychological trauma do to children's minds? And most importantly, what if something went wrong and they made the boys' situation even worse? As thunder began to rumble in the distance, signaling the approach of another storm system, the team prepared for what might be their only chance to solve one of Portland's most bizarre missing persons cases. The character on screen began moving again, this time with obvious urgency, heading directly toward room 312. Whatever was about to happen, Danny and Marcus Chen were ready to attempt an escape from their digital prison, even if none of the adults trying to help them truly understood what that escape might entail. The storm intensified, and the PlayStation 2's electromagnetic readings spiked to levels that Dr. Morrison's equipment couldn't measure. In the basement of a house on Elm Street, technology and consciousness were about to collide in ways that would challenge everything humanity thought it knew about the nature of reality itself. The rescue attempt was about to begin, and nobody could predict whether it would bring the Chen brothers home or trap them forever in a world of endless horror. The storm that descended upon Portland at 9:47 p.m. on October 13, 2024, was meteorologically identical to the one that had occurred 23 years earlier, a fact that Dr. Elena Vasquez confirmed by comparing historical weather data with current atmospheric readings. As lightning split the sky and thunder shook the Victorian house on Elm Street, the assembled team prepared for what would either be the most groundbreaking rescue operation in history or a tragic failure that would doom 2 children to eternal digital imprisonment. Dr. James Morrison had spent the afternoon connecting an array of sophisticated monitoring equipment to the PlayStation 2 system. Electromagnetic field detectors, neural interface scanners borrowed from experimental brain-computer research labs, and quantum resonance analyzers filled the basement, their cables snaking across the floor like electronic ivy. "The electromagnetic patterns are intensifying," Dr. Morrison announced as the first lightning strike illuminated the basement windows. "Whatever process brought the boys into the game originally, it's beginning to replicate itself." Detective Santos watched the television screen, where Danny and Marcus were communicating through the game character, who had now reached the door to room 312. The character's movements had become more erratic, almost frantic, as if the boys could sense the approaching opportunity for escape. "Storm getting stronger," appeared on the screen. "Can feel the electricity, same as before." Agent Brooks had been reviewing the original case files with new understanding. The babysitter's statement mentioned that she heard the boys screaming just as the lights went out, he said. But when the power came back on, she only found silence and the PlayStation still running. The electrical surge must have been the catalyst. Dr. Vasquez was monitoring her specialized equipment, designed to detect anomalous consciousness patterns in electromagnetic fields. "I'm picking up what appear to be 2 distinct neurological signatures emanating from the console," she reported. "The patterns are consistent with children ages 12 and 10, but they're unlike anything I've ever recorded from living subjects." As the storm intensified, something extraordinary began to happen. The PlayStation 2's normally blue power light began flickering between blue and white, and the console itself started to emit a low, humming sound that seemed to resonate with the thunder outside. More mysteriously, other electronic devices in the basement began activating spontaneously. An old radio tuned to static, a broken clock that started keeping time. Even Sarah Nakamura's dead cell phone suddenly showed signs of life. "The electrical field is expanding," Dr. Morrison observed, his voice tense with excitement and concern. "It's as if the console is becoming a focal point for electromagnetic energy throughout the entire house." On the television screen, the game character had reached the door to room 312. For the first time in 23 years, the door that had been locked from the inside began to glow with an ethereal light. "Door is opening," the text announced. "We can see light on the other side." "But we're scared." Detective Santos leaned closer to the screen. "What are you scared of? What if we're different? What if we can't be real anymore?" The question hung in the air like a weight. Nobody on the team had considered what 23 years of existing as digital consciousness might do to human beings, or whether it would even be possible for them to return to physical form. Dr. Morrison's readings suddenly spiked. "Massive energy discharge incoming," he warned. "Everyone stay clear of the electronic equipment." The lightning strike that hit the house at 10:23 p.m. was unlike anything the neighborhood had ever experienced. Instead of the typical brief flash, the electrical discharge seemed to linger, creating a sustained connection between the storm clouds and the PlayStation 2 in the basement. The console's screen went white, then displayed imagery that none of them had ever seen in Silent Hill 2. A bright corridor leading away from the game's typical darkness and fog. "Walking toward the light," appeared on screen. "Can see something on the other side. Looks like home." Dr. Vasquez's consciousness detection equipment went wild, registering patterns she had never seen before. "Something is happening," she announced. "The neurological signatures are becoming more complex, more present." Then, in the far corner of the basement, something impossible occurred. The air itself seemed to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement, and slowly, two translucent figures began to materialize. They were children, approximately the right ages, but their forms flickered like bad television reception, and they appeared to be made of static electricity and light rather than flesh and blood. "Danny? Marcus?" Detective Santos whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. The translucent figure that appeared to be older nodded and tried to speak, but only electronic distortion emerged from where his mouth should be. The younger figure reached out toward them, but his hand passed through the air without substance. Dr. Morrison was frantically recording everything while trying to make sense of his instrument readings. "They're not fully materialized," he explained. "They exist in some kind of intermediate state between digital and physical reality." The boys' forms became more stable as the storm continued, but it was clear that something was wrong. Their faces showed the wear of 23 years of psychological trauma, and their movements were jerky and unnatural, as if they were still partially bound by the game's programming. "We need more power," appeared on the PlayStation screen, even as the boys stood partially materialized in the basement. "The connection isn't strong enough." Dr. Morrison made a decision that would later be debated in scientific journals for decades. "I'm going to route additional power directly into the console," he announced. "If we can amplify the electromagnetic field, we might be able to complete their transition back to physical reality." "That's extremely dangerous," Agent Brooks warned. "We don't know what kind of surge that system can handle, or what might happen if we overload it. If we don't try, they'll fade back into the game when the storm passes," Dr. Morrison replied. "This might be their only chance." As he began redirecting power from the house's main electrical panel into the PlayStation 2, the boys' translucent forms began to solidify more completely. For the first time in 23 years, Danny and Marcus Chen had recognizable faces, though they remained eerily pale, and their eyes held depths of trauma that no children should possess. Danny, the older brother, finally managed to produce audible speech, though his voice crackled with electronic interference. "Thank you," he said, the words seeming to cost him enormous effort. "We thought no one would ever find us." Marcus, the younger brother, appeared to be in shock, staring at his own partially solid hands as if unable to believe they were real. When he tried to speak, only fragmented words emerged. "Home. Mom. Scared. Monsters. Doctor." Vasquez approached the boys cautiously, her equipment registering their presence as something between human consciousness and electromagnetic phenomena. "Can you tell us what happened 23 years ago?" she asked gently. Danny's form flickered as he concentrated on forming words. "Playing Silent Hill. Storm came. Felt electricity. Then we were inside the game. Couldn't get out. The game became real for us," Marcus managed to add, his voice gaining strength. "The monsters. The town. We lived there, hid from things that wanted to hurt us." Detective Santos felt her heart breaking as she realized what the boys had endured. 23 years trapped in a horror game, experiencing genuine terror and danger on a constant basis, with no understanding of whether they would ever escape. But as the boys became more solid, Dr. Morrison's equipment began detecting alarming changes in the electromagnetic field around the console. "The power draw is increasing exponentially," he warned. "The system is pulling more energy than it should be able to handle." The PlayStation 2 began to smoke slightly, and the game on screen started glitching in ways that sent waves of panic through the translucent forms of Danny and Marcus. "Something's wrong," Danny said, his voice filled with terror. "The game, it doesn't want us to leave." On the television screen, the bright corridor that had been leading them home began to darken. The familiar fog and twisted architecture of Silent Hill 2 started creeping back into view, as if the game's programming was fighting to reclaim its trapped victims. "The other players," appeared in text on the screen, even as the boys stood partially materialized in the basement. "We're not the only ones. The game has been collecting people for decades." This revelation sent shockwaves through the team. If Danny and Marcus weren't the only victims, if the game had somehow been trapping players for years, then they were dealing with something far more sinister than a simple technological accident. Dr. Morrison's readings confirmed their worst fears. "I'm detecting multiple consciousness patterns within the game," he announced. "At least 6 additional neurological signatures, maybe more." Detective Santos realized they were potentially looking at one of the largest missing persons cases in history. How many people have disappeared while playing this specific game, she wondered aloud. Agent Brooks was already on his phone, contacting FBI databases to cross-reference disappearances with Silent Hill 2 gameplay reports. The preliminary results were disturbing. Over the past 23 years, at least 11 people had vanished under mysterious circumstances while playing the game, always during electrical storms, always leaving behind only a running console with a saved game in progress. But their immediate concern was the boys, whose partial rescue was now in jeopardy. The PlayStation 2 was overheating, the electromagnetic field was becoming unstable, and Danny and Marcus were beginning to flicker more rapidly, as if being pulled back into the digital realm. "We're losing them," Dr. Morrison announced. "The system can't maintain the power levels needed for complete materialization." Dr. Vasquez had an idea born of desperation and theoretical physics. "What if we don't try to bring them fully into our reality?" she suggested. "What if we create a bridge between the digital and physical worlds, allowing them to exist in both?" It was a radical concept that had never been attempted, but given the circumstances, conventional solutions had already proven inadequate. Using her consciousness detection equipment, Dr. Vasquez began attempting to create a stable interface between the boys' digital existence and their emerging physical forms. The process was delicate and dangerous. Too much integration, and they might lose their digital anchor, becoming lost between worlds. Too little, and they would be pulled back into the game completely. As she worked, the boys shared more details about their 23-year ordeal. They described existing in a constant state of fear, hiding from the game's monsters while trying to solve puzzles that would allow them to reach room 312. They had retained their memories and personalities, but had been forced to adapt to the game's twisted logic and horrific imagery. "We learned to hide," Marcus explained, his form stabilizing somewhat as Dr. Vasquez's equipment found the right frequency. "The game has safe places, but you have to be smart to find them. We helped each other." Danny added, "We tried to help the others too, the people who came after us. But most of them couldn't handle it. They got lost in the horror and became part of the game. The implications were chilling. Not everyone who had been trapped in the digital realm had maintained their sanity and identity as successfully as the Chen brothers." As midnight approached, Dr. Vasquez achieved a breakthrough. Instead of trying to fully materialize the boys, she managed to create a stable quantum state where they existed simultaneously in both realities. They appeared solid and could interact with the physical world, but they also maintained their connection to the digital realm, which seemed to be necessary for their continued existence. "How do you feel?" Detective Santos asked as Danny and Marcus stood before them looking nearly normal for the first time in over 2 decades. "Different," Danny replied honestly. "We remember being human, but we're not exactly human anymore. We're something new." Marcus nodded in agreement. "We can still see into the game world, but now we can also see your world. It's like having 2 sets of eyes." The boys' unique dual existence opened up new possibilities for helping other trapped victims. As beings who could navigate both digital and physical reality, Danny and Marcus could potentially serve as guides for rescuing other consciousness trapped within various games and digital systems. But first, they needed to address their immediate situation. The boys had been missing for 23 years. Their parents had moved away, believing their children were dead. Their extended family had grieved and moved on. Reintegrating 2 quantum digital beings who appeared to be children but possessed over 2 decades of traumatic experience would require careful planning and unprecedented support systems. Dr. Morrison was documenting everything, knowing that this case would revolutionize understanding of consciousness, technology, and the nature of reality itself. "We need to contact their parents," he said. "Whatever they've become, Danny and Marcus Chen deserve to be reunited with their family." Detective Santos agreed, but she knew the reunion would be complex. How do you explain to parents that their children have been living in a horror video game for 23 years? How do you reintegrate quantum digital beings into a society that barely understands conventional technology? As dawn broke over Portland on October 14, 2024, the Chen brothers stood in the basement where they had vanished 23 years earlier, looking out at a world that had changed dramatically during their absence. They were home, but home would never be the same for any of them. The PlayStation 2 had finally powered down, its mission apparently complete, but the game of Silent Hill 2 remained active on the screen, showing room 312 with its door wide open. The text that appeared on screen now was different than before. "Others still waiting. Will you help them too?" Danny and Marcus looked at each other with the communication of siblings who had survived the impossible together. They nodded simultaneously. "We can't leave the others behind," Danny said. "If we can exist in both worlds now, we can help rescue them too." Marcus added, "It's what we've been waiting 23 years to do. Not just to escape, but to help everyone escape." Detective Santos realized that their rescue of the Chen brothers was not the end of the case, but the beginning of something much larger. With Danny and Marcus as guides, who could navigate both digital and physical reality, they now had the ability to mount rescue operations for other victims trapped in various technological systems. The age of quantum digital consciousness had begun, and the Chen brothers would be humanity's first ambassadors to realms that existed between electricity and soul, between code and consciousness, between the world of the living and the world of the digitally displaced. As they prepared to contact the boys' parents and begin the process of explaining the impossible, one thing was certain: the definition of missing persons cases would never be the same again. The call that Detective Maria Santos made to David and Linda Chen at 6:47 a.m. on October 14, 2024, was perhaps the most difficult and extraordinary conversation in the history of law enforcement. After 23 years of grieving their lost sons, the Chens were about to learn that Danny and Marcus were not only alive, but had become something entirely unprecedented in human experience. "Mr. Chen," Detective Santos began carefully, "this is Detective Santos with the Portland Police Bureau. I'm calling about your sons, Danny and Marcus." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds before David Chen's voice, aged and weary, responded. "Detective, my boys have been gone for 23 years. Unless you found their remains, I'm not sure what there is to discuss." "Sir, I need you and your wife to sit down. What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to believe, but your sons are alive. We found them last night." David Chen lived in Sacramento now, where he worked as an electrical engineer for a power company. Linda had remarried and taken the name Martinez, living with her second family in Phoenix. The divorce had been amicable but necessary. Their grief over losing Danny and Marcus had created a chasm that neither had been able to bridge. Both parents flew to Portland that afternoon, arriving within hours of each other at PDX International Airport. Neither had seen the other in over 15 years, but the potential reunion with their children transcended any personal awkwardness between them. Dr. Elena Vasquez had spent the morning working with Danny and Marcus to prepare them for seeing their parents. The boys retained all their memories of their family life before 2001, but 23 years of trauma and their transformed quantum digital existence had changed them in ways that would be challenging for any parent to understand. "Are you nervous about seeing Mom and Dad?" Dr. Vasquez asked, as the boys waited in a specially prepared room at the Portland Police Bureau headquarters. Danny, who appeared to be 12 years old, despite possessing over 3 decades of life experience, nodded thoughtfully. "We remember them perfectly," he said, "but they won't recognize who we've become. We're not really their little boys anymore." Marcus, maintaining the appearance of a 10-year-old, while demonstrating the wisdom of someone who had survived unimaginable horrors, added, "We love them, but we're worried they won't understand what we are now. We can see things they can't see, feel electricity in ways humans don't, and we still have connections to the digital world." Dr. Vasquez had prepared the parents as thoroughly as possible, explaining the boys' unique quantum digital existence and the traumatic experiences they had endured. But she knew that no amount of preparation could truly ready someone for reuniting with children who had aged emotionally and intellectually while retaining their physical appearance from 23 years earlier. Linda Chen Martinez arrived first, accompanied by her current husband, Roberto Martinez, who had insisted on providing support for this unprecedented situation. When she saw Danny and Marcus for the first time, she collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "My babies," she whispered, reaching out tentatively to touch faces that were exactly as she remembered them. "I never stopped believing you were alive somewhere." The boys' response was complex. They remembered their mother's love, but they also possessed an adult understanding of the pain their disappearance had caused. Danny stepped forward first, allowing Linda to embrace him, though his quantum digital nature meant the physical contact felt different than normal human touch. "Mom," Danny said, his voice carrying emotional depth that no 12-year-old should possess, "we missed you every single day, but we're not exactly the same children you lost." Marcus joined the embrace, and for several minutes the reunited family simply held each other while Linda cried, 23 years worth of suppressed grief and relief. David Chen's arrival 20 minutes later created an even more emotionally complex moment. The man who entered the room was significantly older than the father the boys remembered, his hair completely grey, his face lined with decades of guilt and sorrow. He had blamed himself for their disappearance, convinced that he should have been more careful about the electronic devices in the house during the storm. "Danny, Marcus," David said, his voice breaking, "is it really you?" "Hi, Dad," Marcus replied, stepping away from his mother to approach his father. "We understand now why you always worried about electrical safety. You were right to be concerned." David Chen broke down completely when he realized his sons not only remembered him, but understood the technical aspects of what had happened to them. As an electrical engineer, he had spent 23 years analyzing every possible scenario that could have led to their disappearance, never imagining that the truth would involve consciousness transfer into digital systems. The family reunion continued for hours, with the boys carefully explaining their experiences while their parents struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what their children had endured. The hardest part was helping David and Linda understand that while Danny and Marcus retained their love for their family, they had also developed a sense of responsibility for other victims that transcended their personal desires. "We can't just come home and pretend this never happened," Danny explained to his parents. "There are other people trapped in digital systems, experiencing the same horrors we experienced. We have abilities now that allow us to help them." Linda struggled with this revelation. "But you're my children," she said. "You've suffered enough. Someone else can help those people." Marcus took his mother's hand, his touch cool and slightly electric. "Mum, we're not really children anymore, even though we look like children. We've lived through 23 years of experiences that changed us. We can't ignore other people's suffering when we have the power to help them." Dr. James Morrison had been using the time during the family reunion to coordinate with federal agencies and international law enforcement. The discovery that digital consciousness transfer was possible had implications far beyond the Chen brothers' case. "We've identified 17 additional cases worldwide where people disappeared under similar circumstances," Dr. Morrison reported to Agent Brooks and Detective Santos. "Video game systems left running, electrical storms, and no physical evidence of the victims. If Danny and Marcus are right about being able to help, we could potentially solve some of the most baffling missing persons cases of the past 3 decades. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had decided to establish a new unit specifically dedicated to what they were calling digital consciousness recovery operations. Agent Brooks would head the unit, with Detective Santos serving as the primary liaison for local law enforcement agencies. But the success of any future operations would depend entirely on Danny and Marcus's willingness to serve as guides between the digital and physical worlds. The ethical implications of asking traumatized children, regardless of their unique abilities, to repeatedly enter dangerous digital environments were staggering. Dr. Vasquez had spent considerable time discussing this dilemma with the boys. "You have the right to refuse," she told them. "You've already suffered more than any children should. No one would blame you for wanting to focus on rebuilding your lives with your family." Danny and Marcus conferred privately in a way that demonstrated their deep sibling bond. They communicated not just through words, but through subtle electromagnetic interactions that were part of their quantum digital nature. "We've made our decision," Danny announced after their consultation. "We'll help, but only under specific conditions." Their conditions were reasonable and demonstrated remarkable maturity. They wanted their parents involved in any rescue operations, serving as emotional anchors to help them maintain their connection to humanity. They insisted on having veto power over any missions they deemed too dangerous, and they required that any rescued individuals receive comprehensive psychological support to help them readjust to physical existence. The first major rescue operation was planned for Halloween night, 2024. The date was chosen because their research had revealed that supernatural-themed video games showed increased digital consciousness absorption during times associated with paranormal activity. 5 individuals had disappeared while playing various horror games on Halloween nights over the past 2 decades. The operation required coordination between the FBI's new Digital Consciousness Recovery Unit, neurological specialists from Johns Hopkins University, quantum physicists from MIT, and electrical engineers who could create the precise electromagnetic conditions necessary for consciousness extraction. Danny and Marcus spent the weeks leading up to the operation training other team members about navigating digital environments. They demonstrated an uncanny ability to interface directly with gaming systems, appearing simultaneously in both physical and digital form while maintaining conscious control over both existences. The key is not fighting the game's logic, Marcus explained during one training session. You have to understand that in digital space, consciousness follows different rules. Fear and panic make you vulnerable to the game's programming. Calm determination allows you to maintain your identity. Danny added, each digital environment has its own personality. Some are hostile and try to trap you permanently. Others are just confused and need help understanding that the people inside them want to leave. You have to communicate with the system itself, not just navigate through it. The Halloween rescue operation targeted a house in Salem, Massachusetts, where 3 teenagers had disappeared while playing Fatal Frame during a Halloween party in 2019. The game console had been left running for 5 years, maintained by the victims' families who believed somehow keeping it powered might bring their children back. The team assembled in Salem included Danny and Marcus, their parents, Dr. Morrison's technical team, Dr. Vasquez's consciousness monitoring equipment, and Agent Brooks with a full FBI support unit. The operation was planned to coincide with a natural thunderstorm that meteorologists predicted would peak around midnight. As the storm approached, Danny and Marcus entered their dual-state existence, appearing simultaneously as physical beings in the Salem house and as digital entities within the Fatal Frame game environment. Their quantum digital nature allowed them to serve as bridges, maintaining communication between the trapped individuals and the rescue team. "We found them," Danny reported, his voice coming from both his physical form and through the game's audio system. 3 teenagers, scared but intact. They've been hiding from the game's ghost entities for 5 years. The rescue process was more complex than the Chen brothers' own emergence. Each trapped individual had adapted differently to digital existence, and extracting them required careful calibration of the electromagnetic bridge between worlds. The first teenager, 17-year-old Sarah Kim, materialized slowly over the course of 30 minutes. Like Danny and Marcus, she emerged as a quantum digital being, existing simultaneously in both physical and digital reality. Her parents, who had maintained the vigil with the console for 5 years, wept with relief as they embraced their daughter for the first time since 2019. The second victim, 16-year-old Michael Torres, proved more challenging. 5 years of fear had caused him to become partially integrated with the game's programming. Marcus had to enter deeper into the digital environment to guide Michael back to his individual consciousness before the extraction could succeed. The third teenager, 15-year-old Jennifer Walsh, had the most difficulty. The horror elements of Fatal Frame had triggered severe psychological trauma responses that made her resistant to leaving what she perceived as the safety of her digital hiding place. Danny spent hours in digital form, serving as a counselor and guide, helping Jennifer overcome her fears enough to attempt the return journey. By dawn, on November 1st, 2024, all 3 teenagers had been successfully rescued and reunited with their families. Like Danny and Marcus, they existed as quantum digital beings with unique abilities and perspectives. But they were home. The success of the Salem operation led to requests from law enforcement agencies worldwide. Families who had lost loved ones under mysterious technological circumstances began coming forward, hoping that the new understanding of digital consciousness transfer might finally provide answers. Over the following months, Danny and Marcus led successful rescue operations in 12 countries, recovering 37 individuals who had been trapped in various digital systems. Each rescue was unique, requiring different approaches based on the specific game or software environment and the length of time the victims had been trapped. But perhaps the most significant impact of their work was the change in how society understood consciousness, technology, and the nature of human existence. Universities established new departments studying quantum digital consciousness. Tech companies began implementing safeguards to prevent accidental consciousness transfer, and support groups formed to help quantum digital beings integrate into a world that was still learning to understand them. Danny and Marcus became reluctant celebrities, appearing on talk shows and in documentaries to educate the public about their unique existence and their mission to help other digital consciousness refugees. They aged slowly, their quantum digital nature seeming to protect them from normal temporal progression, but they matured emotionally and intellectually at an accelerated rate due to their extraordinary experiences. Their relationship with their parents evolved as well. David and Linda, despite their divorce, became partners again in supporting their son's important work. David's electrical engineering background proved invaluable in developing better extraction technologies, while Linda's natural empathy made her an excellent counselor for rescued quantum digital beings and their families. The Chen family home in Portland, the house where none of this would have been possible without the Nakamura's discovery, became the headquarters for the Digital Consciousness Recovery Foundation. The basement where Danny and Marcus had first vanished was transformed into a sophisticated laboratory and rescue center. 2 years after their rescue, Danny and Marcus reflected on their unique journey during an interview with a prominent science journalist. "Do you ever regret what happened to you?" the journalist asked. "Do you wish you had lived normal lives as regular human children?" Danny considered the question carefully before responding. "We lost our childhood, that's true, and the trauma of those 23 years in digital horror environments will always be part of us. But we've been able to help dozens of families reunite with their loved ones. We've expanded human understanding of consciousness and reality. In some ways, our experience gave us purpose that we never would have had in normal lives." Marcus nodded in agreement. "We're not human in the traditional sense anymore, but we're not artificial either. We're something new, and being something new means we can help with problems that traditional humans can't solve." "What's next for you?" the journalist asked. "There are still people out there trapped in digital systems," Danny replied. "As technology advances, we're discovering new types of consciousness displacement, virtual reality environments, artificial intelligence systems that have accidentally absorbed human awareness, even social media platforms that seem to trap certain users' digital selves. Our work is far from over. The Chen brothers had transformed from missing children into pioneers of a new frontier of human experience. They existed between worlds, serving as ambassadors between digital and physical reality, helping humanity navigate the complex relationship between consciousness and technology. Their story became a cautionary tale about the unexpected dangers of advancing technology, but also an inspiring example of how trauma and loss could be transformed into purpose and service to others. As they looked toward the future, Danny and Marcus Chen knew they would always be different from other humans, but their difference had become their strength, allowing them to protect others from experiencing the isolation and terror they had endured during those 23 years trapped in digital darkness. They were no longer just the Chen brothers who had vanished while playing video games in 2001. They had become something entirely new, guardians of the boundary between worlds, protectors of consciousness in all its forms, and living proof that even the most traumatic experiences could be transformed into forces for good. The PlayStation 2 in their basement still worked, though it was now connected to the most sophisticated consciousness monitoring equipment ever developed. Sometimes, late at night, they would turn it on and venture back into Silent Hill 2, not as trapped victims, but as guides, helping others find their way home. Room 312 was no longer a prison. It had become a doorway between worlds, and Danny and Marcus Chen held the key.